His name actually isn't Butch Cassidy.
He read books, he played the harmonica.
You can see the cabin over here. This is the kind of story that Butch Cassidy would have been told as a child. Butch met someone who would deeply influence his life. Butch came home and had a difficult conversation with his mother, and she would never again. I'm hiking up a hill outside of Circleville, Utah, and this is the place where the famous American outlaw Butch Cassidy spent most of his teenage years. But one of the most surprising things about Butch Cassidy to me is that he grew up a Mormon, or as we prefer to be called, a Latter-day Saint. Most people know Butch Cassidy because of the famous 1969 movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And while that film isn't completely accurate, a lot of researchers have suggested that Paul Newman's portrayal of Butch's positive personality was pretty close to the mark. Butch Cassidy was a different kind of outlaw. One researcher has said that Butch followed a strict moral code. He didn't kill people during any of his robberies in the American West, and he generally robbed from big companies, railroads, corporations, and not from average people. And another biographer who interviewed dozens of people who knew Butch said that they unanimously agreed that he was one of the finest men that they ever knew. My name's Casey Griffiths, and I grew up in Utah, and I'm surprised to hear that a lot of these stories took place in my own backyard. And also, as a believing Latter-day Saint, I'm interested in knowing a little bit about Butch and his background. So for the next few minutes, we're going to explore a few questions about Butch Cassidy. A lot is known about his later life, but not so much about his early life. What kind of child was he? How devout was his family? Why did he turn to a life of crime? And did growing up as a Latter-day Saint have any impact on his moral code? For the next few minutes, we're going to visit some locations from Butch's childhood, and we'll try and explore and answer these questions as well as we can.
To be clear, we're not here to justify Butch Cassidy. He did bad things with bad people, some of whom were even murderers. We just want to explore his Latter-day Saint background.
So here's the plan. We're gonna travel south and visit several places that are linked to Butch Cassidy. And first, we're gonna go to Beaver, Utah. I've been to Beaver a lot of times, but I never really realized how much it was linked to the story of Butch Cassidy.
The town of Beaver is a beautiful little city that's located just off the I-15 freeway as you head south in Utah. And it's a settlement that was established by early Latter-day Saints. Surprisingly, there's not much here about Butch Cassidy. But in the Courthouse Museum, we found some exhibits, portraits of his grandparents, and other interesting items.
We don't know the exact place where Butch Cassidy was born, so I thought it might be a good idea if we take you to a place where we can kind of get an overview of the environment that he grew up in. And this is a great place to learn a little bit about the rich Latter-day Saint roots that Butch Cassidy has, and why his family found themselves in a place like Beaver, Utah. His name actually isn't Butch Cassidy, though we're gonna refer to him as that throughout the video for simplicity's sake. His real name was Robert Leroy Parker, and he was named after both of his grandfathers, Robert Parker and Robert Giles, who immigrated here. Both of these men converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints while they lived in Great Britain. And then they crossed the plains from the cool and pleasant British Isles to the hot Utah desert.
In fact, during those times, tens of thousands of people in England converted to the church and immigrated to Utah. Both of Butch's grandparents and his parents made the difficult and dangerous journey across the Great Plains. Some even pulled handcarts.
There were a few interesting stories from Butch's family's immigration. For instance, on Butch's paternal family side, while they were crossing the plains, one of Butch's uncles, Arthur, got lost. He was only 5 years old, and the family didn't know where he was, So the father decided to go back and see if he could find Arthur, while the mother traveled ahead with the wagon train that had to keep moving. Before he left, she gave him a bright red shawl and gave him some instructions that if he found the boy, when he came back in the view of the camp, he should pull out the red shawl so that she would know that the boy was okay. Or that if he found the little boy and he was dead, he should wrap him in the red shawl and bury him. A few days later, after the train had stopped, she stood there watching the horizon in nervous anticipation to find out what had happened to her son. She saw her husband come up over the hill, and then to her relief, she saw the bright red shawl was still with him, meaning her son was okay. When the father arrived back in the encampment, he told them that he had traveled back and found the little boy with a nearby woodsman who had taken him in. The little boy told him that he was alone and scared, and that there were angry dogs barking at him, which was probably feral wolves at the time. This is the kind of story that Butch Cassidy would have been told as a child growing up. Now, on his maternal side, his grandparents left England and almost wound up traveling across the plains alongside the famous Willie and Martin Handcart Company. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because that's the famous handcart company that was trapped in an early winter that resulted in hundreds of deaths. Butch's maternal grandparents barely missed being in part of that company. They crossed the plains, but they decided to travel a little bit later than the Willie and Martin handcart companies, so they weren't part of that either. When they got here, the entire territory was being colonized by the Latter-day Saints, and that explains why Butch's family ended up here in Beaver. Butch's grandfather had experience in the woolen mills in England, and he was called to come here to Beaver to help set up a woolen mill that would provide industry. So it was in Beaver that Butch's mother and father met, they fell in love, and they were eventually sealed for time and all eternity in a Latter-day Saint ritual in the endowment house in Salt Lake City. And sometime after, Butch, their very first child, was born. Butch's grandfather actually traveled all the way up from Washington, Utah to participate in another Latter-day Saint ritual, his baby blessing. What we know about Butch's mother, Anne, was that she was very religious, that she was active in community life and very active within her faith. There's actually a newspaper clipping from a Beaver newspaper that talks about her being in an accident where she was thrown out of a wagon with her baby. This wasn't Butch, this would have been one of Butch's brothers, but apparently her face was badly scarred when this occurred. Butch's father, Maximilian, was gone a lot. He enlisted in the militia and fought in the Black Hawk War. He also acted as a postal carrier where he carried mail up and down the corridor in Utah, sometimes having to avoid Native American attacks. And he often assisted people in crossing the plains as well. But the bottom line is he was gone quite a bit. And some historians have posited that his absence may have led Butch to seek out less than savory mentors that kind of brought him into the outlaw life. So this is where a lot of Butch's childhood took place, his formative years. When he was about 14, his father decided to move them over the mountain to a settlement he'd seen during his journeys named Circleville. So that's the next place we're going to go. Let's go to Circleville, Utah.
Circleville, Utah is another quiet little town, also founded by Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, if you ever come to Circleville, you're going to notice a lot of things linked to Butch Cassidy. Like right here, Butch Cassidy's Hideout Motel and Cafe. We're going to go and try the food, see what it's like. Maybe this is what Butch ate. There's the Wild Bunch.
Now that we've enjoyed some of the local delicacies, it's time to head to our main location. Only a couple miles south of Circleville, you'll find Butch Cassidy's boyhood home.
Hey, let's go check this out.
Now, while we are certain that Butch grew up in Circleville, we're not 100% sure how accurate this location is. But it is being considered as a state monument and does nicely represent the conditions he would have grown up in.
You can see the cabin over here, and we don't know how much of this is original, but the cabin does give you a feel for what frontier life would have been like. Now, imagine Butch's mother and father living here. They eventually have 13 children. Butch is the oldest, and in a space this small, it's just person to person.
This small home may have influenced Butch to seek something bigger, to seek a life with more freedom than what he had at the farm.
Some of Butch's younger siblings talked about his relationship with his mother, that he loved her, used to pick her up and twirl her around, set her down on a chair, and then say, "Bring the crown, 'cause Ma's the queen." They also talked about what a fun brother he was, that he would take them on animal rides. One time, they said that he captured some Mormon crickets, tied a string around their legs, and then had his siblings race the crickets. On another occasion, because Butch was kind of a rascal, he actually stole some of his neighbor's wine and then fed it to some chickens, and his siblings got a big kick out of watching the chickens stumble all over the place.
According to Butch's sister, he read books, he played the harmonica for his family, and he even trained a magpie how to speak. His sister also reported that Butch and his mother planted these poplar trees standing here today. But things weren't always so dandy out here. It was a hard life. The weather once wiped out their cattle and destroyed their crops.
There were also signs of conflict with the local community. For instance, one day a man came to the farm and asked for Butch's mother's signature, which she signed because she thought it was for a lease, and then realized that she just signed away part of their property. When Butch's father found out, he went to the local bishop to dispute, and the bishop ruled in favor of the signing being legitimate, meaning they lost part of their land.
Unfortunately, we don't know the full details of this story. Some say the church was practicing the sharing of land, or that the land belonged to someone else. But we do know that they struggled. Butch's father may have left the church if it wasn't for his mother's faith.
During this time, too, there were major changes that happened in Circleville as well that may have led Butch away from a church lifestyle. Circleville had nearby deposits of silver located. A lot of miners poured into this area that brought along with them a lot of disreputable businesses like saloons and brothels, and Butch may have been affected by this. Now, there were other things that happened during Butch's adolescence that may have led him towards the outlaw lifestyle as well. One of the most famous stories is that Butch traveled into town quite a fair distance to purchase a pair of trousers. When he got there, the store was closed, and so he broke into the store, took the trousers, and then left behind an IOU. This didn't amuse the store owner, who called the lawman. No charges were made, but early incidents like this may have caused him to feel like that was unfair. However, it was down the road a little bit from here where Butch started working at a ranch that he may have met some people that led him into the outlaw lifestyle. So let's head down the road and we'll visit that spot. We're here in Spry, Utah, and near here was the Marshall Ranch where Butch's mother, him, and several of his siblings moved to work and make some extra income. The ranch was owned by a man named James Marshall, who one lawman called one of the worst criminals in the area. Marshall was involved in a practice called rustling. Rustling is basically stealing livestock. Cattle, sheep, horses were the worst offense, and many ranchers at the time didn't see it as overly wrong to take an animal every now and then, thinking that maybe one wouldn't really be missed. Others saw it as a very lucrative business. It was while he was at this ranch that Butch met someone who would deeply influence his life, a man named Mike Cassidy. In fact, it was from Mike Cassidy that Butch took the last name that would become his most famous alias, Butch Cassidy.
In Mike Cassidy, Butch may have seen a role model, someone who could go where he pleased and do what he wanted. Mike trained Butch about guns, horses, and the art of rustling.
And it was rustling that actually served as a kind of gateway drug into the life of crime that Butch later followed, leading to robbing banks and robbing trains. So, sensing that good things weren't happening while they were here, Butch's mom decided to take her kids and move back up the road to Circleville. She wanted to get him away from Mike Cassidy. Mike eventually fades away from the story, but the damage was already done. It was just a short time after they moved back to Circleville that Butch came home and had a difficult conversation with his mother that we want to talk about next. So let's head back up the road to Circleville. One evening, Butch came home, and his mother noticed that he was, well, different. He told his mother that he was leaving the next morning. We don't know the exact reason why he was leaving. Some suggest that Butch was upset with their church and some of the larger organizations in the area. However, there were other more pressing reasons to want to leave. One account says that one of Butch's friends had just been released from jail and had gotten into a fight, and that the two of them were going to flee the area together. Another account says that Butch had stolen some horses and sold them under a false bill of sale and was being investigated by the local sheriff. Another account says that Butch had wrestled some horses and was on his way to sell them in a distant location. But the most feasible answer is probably just that Butch wanted more freedom. He wanted the kind of freedom that Mike Cassidy had. Freedom to go out and leave his tiny home and make more money and experience more than he thought he could in this little tiny corner of Utah. And the place that he aimed to go to was Telluride, Colorado. Telluride was a go-to place for many young Latter-day Saints who were trying to get away. And it was in Telluride where Butch would carry out his first big bank robbery.
Again, we don't know the exact reason he left, but it may have been a mix of many of these things.
So the next morning, Butch woke up and prepared to leave. His mother asked him to stay, even asking him to remain until his father returned home and he could talk with him. But Butch was undeterred. He mounted his horse and started down the trail, and his mother watched her 18-year-old son ride away, and she would never again see him in this life. So we're actually here in the cemetery in Circleville. Working as a historian, you go to a lot of cemeteries to get used to it. And I'm using the Find a Grave app, and we're gonna see if we can find the grave of Butch's parents. It says right now that we're just about a 1-minute walk away, and it also has a photograph of what the grave and the headstone looks like. And I'm seeing one here that kinda looks like the picture, and so let's walk over, and this might be where the final resting place of Butch's folks are. So Maximilian and Ann Giles, right here, born June 8th, 1844, July 12th, 1847, born in England and born in Scotland. So here is the final resting place of the parents of Butch Cassidy. Butch's mother remained an active Latter-day Saint and continued to pray for him throughout her life. Did her prayers make any difference? Well, we're not really here to idolize Butch Cassidy. The truth is, he did some bad things. He scared people. He stole from people. He was the leader of a band of outlaws that included some murderers, and he would have been considered what we would call today a mob boss. But throughout it all, one historian has noted he did maintain a strict moral code. Don't kill people. Treat others with respect. Don't steal from average people that might not have means. And it's possible that Butch's mother and his family may have instilled in him some Christian values that helped him maintain this strict moral code. There's more to this story, by the way, too. Butch wasn't the only Latter-day Saint outlaw. There were some in his gang and others who left the state of Utah. And we would love to bring you more of those stories, so please consider donating to Scripture Central in the link that's listed below this video so that we can continue to travel and tell you a little bit more about the history of the Latter-day Saints.